Barbers, what was your oh crap moment? My coworker at a salon was cutting a girl's hair and found lice. The girl's mom had left her for the trim and she had to wait for her mom in the lobby. We spent the next hour or so frantically cleaning around all of the other clients and stylists to sanitize the whole place top to bottom. When the mom came back and asked her why she didn't have her hair cut, she replied, "They found out. Who brings their lice-ridden child to the salon? Like, what?" Yeah, talk about a bad hair day for everyone. Story 2. The typical not a barber here, but I used to go to a local barber college to get my haircut because it was like cheap. One girl had never cut a white guy's hair before, and her teacher asked if I was okay with it. I said, sure, she has to learn somehow, and it's just hair. It can be shaved and should grow back. I told her how I wanted the haircut, pretty simple, a little short and off the ears. Jokingly, I said, don't take my ears off. Long story short, I left with a bald head and a Band-Aid on the top of my left ear. Even her teacher couldn't save the haircut. I did my best to try and help the girl calm down as she was ugly crying. Went back a month later and asked if the girl was there. Thankfully she was, and I simply smiled and said, round 2. She did it perfectly the second time around. Story 3. Not seeing a lot of actual barbers in this thread because probably a lot of these sorts of stories will make you look like a bad barber, but oh well. Here's a collection of my oh crap stories from my 8 years in the industry. Beauty school, this dude and his hippie girlfriend come in for $7 haircuts. Immediately, something seemed off about the girlfriend. She seemed a little not too all there and was cross-eyed and had dreads poking out of her hippie hat. The appointments were a bit staggered, so I finished the guy's one all-over buzz cut and my classmate called me over to help with hers. When she took off the girl's hat, her hair was completely matted and filthy. We called over an instructor who tried to explain that we couldn't service someone like her. She didn't seem to understand and they left without paying. I'll never forget that smell. Also, beauty school again, when bang trims go poorly. If you get even slightly too high and a cowlick in the front goes boing and springs a hair right up off the face, there's literally no coming back from a bad bang trim. To be fair, if it was that important, she shouldn't have been having students doing it. This also applies to colors. Local teenage girls would come in expecting a full head of highlights and then be shocked and angry when it goes poorly and takes forever and there's huge lines near the root. Arguments between 17-year-old clients and 19-year-old jailbird beauty school girls were really common. Lice. I've had 3 run-ins with lice on kids in my 8 years of cutting hair. You just have to stop cutting immediately, discreetly send them back to their parents, and spend the next hour cleaning and feeling all crawly. Discovering something like lice is like the classic oh crap moment in haircutting. Years ago, I was working at a shop in SF's Tenderloin. I was standing near the window looking absent-mindedly outside. This woman on the corner decides that I was looking at her, so she shambles into the shop right up to the station and starts threatening me inches from my face. I become acutely aware that my razors and shears are sitting in plain view on the counter next to us, and that I have to get them into my possession and away from her before she can use them against me. Before it gets to that, my coworkers intervene and began corralling her outside. At the doorway, she starts swinging. Cops showed up pretty quick and arrested her about a block away. I spent another year at that shop, constantly looking over my shoulder, certain that she'd one day reappear. Once I had a dude pass out after a haircut. Based on what he told me, he had some sort of sensory issues, and the combination of heat, the neck strip, clipper buzzing, and noise of the shop overwhelmed him. If you've ever dealt with a person fainting, you know what an oh crap moment is. 1 minute, dude is standing up and looking a little worried. Next, he is crumpling to the floor. I'm a little guy, but I was able to sort of catch him and ease him down without anyone getting hurt. It was pretty scary. My first thought was that I somehow ended him. And my personal worst story, I was cutting one of my regulars' hair and he always insisted on scissor over comb instead of clippers on the side, which is fine and kind of my thing anyhow. I was working in the lower right corner of his nape, moving upwards with my 8-inch dry cutting scissors, and he sort of twisted toward me to say something at the precise moment my shears closed. My coworker said I looked pale and panicked. The craziest part is he kept coming to see me, insisted on paying full price plus tip, and continued coming back until he moved away a year later. Story 4. Not me, but my mom, who is a hairdresser. Did you know that some hair dye chemicals don't play well together? Turns out the lady had used some sort of home hair dye chemical that basically has tiny bits of metal in it. She didn't mention it. My mom goes to dye her hair and puts the professional dye on it, and the hair more or less starts melting as the dye reacts. Her hair was totally ruined. There was no saving it. Only thing to do was to just get the new dye off as fast as possible. She was pretty understanding about the whole situation, though. Story 5. I'm not a licensed barber or professional by any means, but I have been cutting my own hair for about 10 years. I'm really good at it, save a lot of time and money, know exactly how to do it, and never have to worry about getting something I don't like anymore. But it has taken a lot of trial and error over the years, especially when I was learning how to fade. This was 3 years ago. I start cutting like I normally do and start fading my sides. At the top of my head, the guard pops off, huge chunk falls down my face. So me, still learning, not knowing how to fix it, decides it's best to just buzz it, which I've really only had to do 3 times in my quote-unquote career. I look dumb as heck with a buzzed head, so for some unknown reason, I also decided to shave my beard thinking maybe it'll equal it all out. Nope. Apologies if this offends anyone, but I look like I'm receiving chemo at this point. Bro, I look like a thumb, big toe looking. So I hated myself. My wife still makes fun of me to this day. I got endless crap from my family and was attached to a hat for like 2 months. This was the moment that made me never mess up again. Well, you know what they say, there's no I in team, but there is one on his head now. Story 6. Geez. I've been barbering for 7 years and I've got a couple stories. Mostly communication errors. I had a client come in with a super tight haircut, looked like it had just been cut, and asked for a 0 on the sides. I'm not sure what this guy was on, but a 0 is bald to me, so I start my bald line for my fade and he freaks out that it's way too short and I ruined his haircut. Since this never happens to me, I got super upset and felt absolutely terrible. I've had clients who text me and ask for an appointment and then I forget to book it. Then they show up and I'm busy and they don't have an appointment. I always comp them because I feel terrible. I used to work in a low-income neighborhood and worked at a black barbershop. I was cutting a kid's hair and since it was so curly, you couldn't see his scalp or anything. Started cutting into it and sure enough, he had ringworm. I have more stories, but those are just the ones that come to mind. Story 7. While I was training at a pretty chic salon in London, there was a kid who came in for a cut with his mom. She was a regular, the typical bi-weekly blow-dry client that was always dressed in the finest fineries and sent her kid to private school. He sat down in my colleague's chair and the mom gave a fairly detailed and particular instruction of a short back and sides, as if my colleague had never heard of a haircut before. She then sat down in the waiting area and picked up a magazine and began reading. This kid was a little crap. He squirmed and complained the entire time. My colleague, bless her, was very diplomatic and tried to be firm. But fair to this kid, she was very experienced at this point and dealt with a fair share of spoiled kids. Towards the end of the cut, she very clearly told the boy to stay still as she was cutting the stray hairs around his ears. She told him that her scissors had just been sharpened and would hurt a lot if she cut him. He agreed to keep his head still. However, as previously stated, this boy was a little crap. He suddenly turned his head to something and she caught the top of his ear. Now, she wasn't lying about getting her scissors sharpened, and those things are sharp when they are. At this point, the mother put down her magazine, put her thunder face on, and stormed over to my colleague's section with the screaming child in it. Wordless, she raised her arm with an open hand and slapped the kid straight in the face. "That'll teach you for not listening." The whole salon was in complete shock. She pulled him up by the arm and dragged him out of the salon without a word to anyone else. We never saw them again. Absolutely the most mental experience of working in a salon. That and the crazy color change I had to do, but that's a story for another time. Story 8. I was in school still at the time and was cutting this guy's hair. He brought his girlfriend along and she was watching like a hawk over me. I'm halfway through the cut and almost done with the fade when the person next to me has their trolley too close to me, so I go to move it. But I didn't pay attention that my other hand had the clippers still running with no guard on. I made a nasty line through the fade that didn't look intentional at all and was sweating my back off on how I was going to fix this. The girlfriend, of course, points it out, and the client is actually super chill about it and has me basically just run a super high 0.5 on the sides and back. 3 years later, and to this day, I haven't had an incident that bad. Story 9. Brother of a barber who used to be a hair model. Back when I used to have a good head of hair, his instructor told a story during one of the shows about a mobster falling asleep during the shave. And while shaving him, he accidentally cut off a mole. He said he kept on putting towels on him and then snuck across the street and hid in a bar watching through the window until the mobster left. Since he was only renting the chair in the shop, he grabbed all his stuff and found another place to work after he was sure the mobster was gone. Whoa. I guess what they didn't tell him was that the mole was cancerous, and by removing it, they actually saved the life of that mobster. Story 10. Barber here. I'm pretty experienced and a successful barber with my own place, but I definitely made some mistakes along the way. This story still makes me cringe inside a little. When I was training, maybe a few months in, so I had a bit of confidence, enough for me to not realize I still didn't know what I was doing. I was cutting this guy's hair and I got to his fringe. He wanted it really short and I was standing in front of him cutting along his forehead whilst chatting away. I took my scissors away to comb his hair, but flicked them around my fingers and they swung around and hit the guy. I froze, he froze. Eventually I asked, "Did I just hit you in the eye, by the way?" He said, "I think so," trying to act like it wasn't sore for some reason. It eventually blew up in the shop once his shock wore off and someone else got him out the door. Found out a month later his wife was a nurse and she used some kind of eye drop and his eye was only scratched. Thank God, because I thought I blinded him. I gave him a free haircut next time. Just the one, though. Story 11. My ex-girlfriend was the barber in this story, and I was the one getting the haircut. I had gotten a last-minute interview for a job, so I asked if she could cut my hair. She didn't have any experience in cutting hair, but I figured she would do a better job than me. We went out to the backyard, and I don't know if the sun was in her eyes or if she was just nervous, but as soon as I saw the first snip she had taken from the front, I knew she had cut too much off. She took a step back and looked like she was about to burst into tears. I assured her that, hey, it's okay, because there was nothing that could be done about it except try not to go any shorter. She finished up, and the end result was kind of goofy looking, but I wasn't too upset. I knew it would grow out, and I really appreciated her doing that. And although I kept thanking and reassuring her it was okay, it took at least a day before she fully believed I was okay with it. Had it been a professional, I probably would have been more upset, but everyone makes mistakes, and bad haircuts are only temporary. Story 12. Not the barber in the story. My younger sister was. The story happened about 38 years ago, so I'm recalling as best as I can remember. Among our friends group was a very sweet young man who we called Bubba. A little heavy and not the sharpest tool in the shed, but a sweet, good-hearted guy. Bubba's hair hung in his face, which drove Sissy crazy. We should note that he had a huge crush on Sissy. One evening, we were sitting around my parents' dining room table playing spades, and that's a card game. As always, Bubba's hair was hanging over his eyes. Sissy was practically twitching, watching him brushing it away every 30 seconds. Finally, she spoke up and said, "Bubba, you need a haircut. Let me just trim your bangs." Of course, he immediately agreed. Scissors and a towel were quickly tracked down, and Sissy started clipping it. It was uneven and kind of patchy. This isn't going well. One of my genius friends spoke up and said, "It ain't even, but I got an idea. Don't trim anymore for a minute." Dude pulls my mom's biscuit mixing bowl out of the cupboard and plonks it on poor Bubba's head. "There you go, just cut straight across." And she did it, and cut straight across the back. The "oh crap" moment happened when Sissy took the bowl off of Bubba's head, and we realized she had given poor Bubba a literal bowl cut. He looked like the Dutch boy paint kid's cousin. Story 13. My mother is a barber. She was tasked with cutting my husband's hair for our wedding. The guard comb thing that goes on an electric razor popped off while she was enthusiastically talking to me. She accidentally buzzed a 0 on the back of his head. A 0 is the shortest you can cut the hair without it being bald, I believe. We never told him and no pictures were taken of the back of his head. If I can help it, I'll be taking this to my grave. If not, he'll forgive me, but I still feel bad. Story 14. Not a barber, but within the first 2 weeks of lockdowns, my boredom mixed with ADHD impulses brought me to think shaving my whole head was a good idea. I also convinced my brother to do it with me because, well, why not? For him, okay. For me, big mistake. Firstly, I do not have the best hairline, which I underestimated because once the top was gone, that crap was pulling graft functions on my forehead. I should also mention I am very skinny, so mix a shave head with that, and I look like I was on chemo. In conclusion, good learning experience, but never again. Story 15. Been a professional barber for 2 years now. I like to tell my clients this story all the time, but it's the first time writing it, so bear with me. When I was in barber school, I had a mother and her son come in to get a haircut for her son. They did not speak English very well, so there was a bit of a language barrier. She told me she wanted a 2 on top, which is very short, 1/4 inch left to be exact, and the little boy had close to 3 inches on top, so I figured they did not understand the lengths. I did try to explain to her that the 2 would be very short by showing her the guard, but she insisted he got a 2 on top. Being the idiot I was, I started my clipper down the middle of the kid's head. I remember hearing the clipper take off a bunch of hair and the child knew something was wrong and started screaming. "Oh crap." The mother came over and scolded me for taking it too short. She told me that she meant she wanted 2 inches left, not a number 2 guard. I apologized like 5 times and told them that I would at least make the buzz cut look good and get them a free haircut next time. As I was finishing up the kid's hair, literally on the last pass with my clippers, by an act of God or something, the guard I was using popped off and I went straight to skin down the middle of the top of this poor child's head. Oh crap. I put my hand over the bald patch on this kid's head and just pretended that nothing had happened. Thankfully, one of my instructors came by and I was able to flag him down for some assistance. I took my hand off the kid's head and my instructor started chuckling and told me to go in the back and get some water while he sorts this out. He ended up getting in a big fight with the mother because she thought I did it on purpose for yelling at me earlier, but it was an accident and she did come to a school and pay $5 for a student haircut. Story 16. Not a professional, but I have two stories that somewhat relate to each other. When I was in high school, my mom would try to save some money by cutting my hair herself. When she was about to finish, she saw a part she needed to fix and grabbed the clippers, forgetting she already took off the guard, and gave me a bald spot at my hairline at the top of my forehead. It was traumatic. Fast forward 9 years to about 5 months ago, lockdown is in full swing, people can't really get haircuts from barbers. A friend of mine needed a haircut and she was willing to trust me. Basically, all she wanted was the sides to be cut at a 3. I told her my incident with my mom cutting my hair and that I would never let that happen to her. Then I noticed the guard on the counter and I started crying. Story 17. I'm not a barber, but twice in my life, I've had someone cut my hair, legit gasp, and put their hands to their mouths, then try to cover the shock and strike a kind of pensive, "How's that looking?" face. I don't blame the first guy, even though I had warned him. I told my neighbor my beard trimmer was deceptively small when he showed up to trim me up and informed me his ex-roommate had stolen his clippers. But the first line down the middle, he knew. After a couple more, he told me he thought we should stop, but I told him it was too late. He had given me the monk. The second was at an actual barbershop. They were younger dudes who prided themselves on being classic before it was cool. They had a keg and they'd offer you a drink no matter the time of day. Not sure how I didn't see this red flag back then. I'd had my hair cut there a few times and I did enjoy it. That is, until I had my first afternoon cut, one move in and the barber immediately gasped and, well, you know the rest. He managed to prevent the Buddha cut, but only barely. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I know this post is more than long enough already, but I just remembered one more. And this guy was the biggest freaking schmuck of them all. Me. It was my 25th birthday, and without going into detail, this is long enough already, but withholding all exaggeration, it was the worst birthday of my life. Somewhere between being way too intoxicated and incredibly sad, I decided to cut my own hair. Back then, I was crazy poor and did this a few times prior to the night in question. Never so intoxicated, though. I had a job interview that I couldn't afford to do poorly on the next day, though. At first, everything was going fine, but then when I went to touch a little bit of hair on the side of my head, I slipped and buzzed. I took a whole razor-sized chunk out. Fun fact was using the same clippers as in story 1, but despite the poor decisions, the buzz in my hair, the hangover, and reeking of drinks, I got the job. And if you're enjoying the video so far, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 18. Not me, but my mom. She's been doing hair for like 40 plus years, and last Friday, she had a new customer who was so unhappy with how her hair turned out. She called out of work that day while still in the chair. My mom gave up her Saturday off to fix it, but the lady is coming back in 2 weeks, so we'll see if that happens again. In the meantime, my mom's stressing that this lady truly hated her hair that much, and it's the first time anything like this has ever happened to her. Story 19. Little late to the party. Not a barber, but a submarine sailor. Inevitably, someone on the boat has to take the role of barber. And very early on, I figured that if I cut hair, I could gain favor with the people around me. First few hundred cuts went surprisingly smooth, and I gained a reputation for being good enough to get a cut for the wife. I had a waiting list, worked after hours, even spent money on some professional gear. It's a week before we get home from our long underway. Guys are lining up to get dolled up for their reunions. This older guy sits down, asks for a simple cut, buzz the top to a 5, and skin fade the sides. So I start on my first pass on the top, clippers cut through his greasy hair with ease, boat rolls, I compensate. I'm almost done with the top and going for my final pass right down the middle. As I reach the front and shift to pull the clippers back, two things happen simultaneously. The man sneezes and the guard flies off. The microsecond between causes a perfect bald patch an inch behind his hairline. I handed him a 10 as an IOU for the fix-up he'll have to get in a few weeks. Story 20. I'm not a barber, but I was getting my hair done once when all the chaos broke loose. This girl with extremely long hair came in for a haircut. The barber asked her how long she wanted her hair. There was a miscommunication. The barber heard that she wanted it cut to the middle of her back. She later said she just wanted it trimmed. Someone misheard or she lied for a free cut. Either way, a few minutes later, she started crying because he cut off a good foot of her hair on one side. She ran out of the salon crying, was outside on the phone in panic mode. They had her come back after an hour and the master stylist finished the cut. Either way, I feel bad for her. Story 21. I used to cut my flatmate's hair in my uni halls. My mate and myself taught ourselves from YouTube videos and a lot of trial and error. So one day I was cutting one of the guys' hair, let's call him Jake, but I didn't have my clippers. Jake, not his real name of course, had a set of beard trimmers which had a pseudo guard you could use. I figured it was better than nothing, proceeded to give him a 3 back and sides and a club cut on top. Jake wanted his 3 blended down into a 1 at the bottom. Yep, no problem, all done. Until I noticed that due to the style of the guard on his beard trimmers, every time Jake put his head back while I was cutting, I'd left a line in his hair. I ended up having to give him a 0 undercut all the way around, which looked quite sick in fairness, but Jake never came to me for a haircut again. I don't blame him, lol. Story 22. When I was in beauty school, I had a guy come in with a beautiful shorter length California surfer hair. He said, an inch all over. I was like, wow, that's a big change. You sure you want to do that? He was like, yeah, that's what I always do. I figured he was one of those guys that gets 1 or 2 haircuts a year, so I put my 8 guard on my clippers and went right up the middle. He looked like I terminated him and started screaming at me, so I grabbed an instructor to finish the haircut. Turns out he wanted an inch off all over. That's when I learned the value of communication. The other big mistake I made was more of a happy accident. The day I got my barber's kit, my school gave you your kit in sections so you would have what you needed for the upcoming classes, but only by a day or 2. I came home and told my stepdad I was going to buy his hair. He was like, okay, no problem. So I'm doing his cut when he asked how I knew what guard to use. My answer, what's a guard? I shaved his head fully as there was no way to make that big patch of 0 blend with his comb over. At church that week, all his friends told him how much better he looked with a buzz over a comb over, and they told him the same thing at work. It's been 14 years now, and he still keeps a 1 all over. Story 23. Now, I'm a little late to the party. Student barber, one of my very first cuts, which I should add I had never cut hair before I went to school, was an older gentleman. This gentleman had bushy, wild eyebrow hair, so my instructor asked me to clean it up for him. Trimmer over comb was how she instructed it. I was nervous and shaky, and my hand slipped. I gasped, pulled it back, half expecting to see a blinded eye. He was totally fine, thought I cut all of his eyebrow off, so I finished the service without cutting him and went on with my day. Story 24. I was a hairstylist for 17 years. In the mid-90s, 2 brothers walked in, one about 17 or so, the other about 10. 17-year-old leaves, my friend gets the 10-year-old, asks him what he wants. A mohawk, he says. Mohawk, are you sure? Yes, says the kid, and he gets a mohawk. 17-year-old brother comes back and is visibly confused seeing his brother with a mohawk. Why did you get a mohawk, he asks. Little brother says, I asked for a mohawk and got this. The older brother says, no, you were supposed to ask for a bowl cut. So the younger one forgot to say the right name and got a completely different haircut. Of course, this is when bowl cuts were popular. Story 25. I was at barber school and a mother came in, dragging her son by the hair, demanding for someone to give him a baldy. When no one was willing because he was crying, she got mad and threw nearby barber equipment on the floor in front of like 30 barber students, 3 instructors, and the 2 co-owners. Some of the barber students who got their crap thrown on the ground then tried to fight the lady. I think everyone there who wasn't trying to fight the lady had an oh crap moment, LMAO. She got thrown out by one of the instructors, but she came back about 2 hours later with a chair and a brand new pair of Walmart clippers. She knocked on the windows and started shaving his head outside the door. Story 26. Okay, in the 11 years I've been doing hair, here's what I've experienced. 1. A polish plate, basically a gigantic dreadlock. All the hair was matted together and smelled terrible. I had to cut that small animal off her head. It wasn't intentional. She had health issues for 10 years. I was very sensitive to her situation until the lady beside her said, Good Lord, woman, when's the last time you brushed your hair? Then I had to go in the back to have a little laugh, but seriously, the smell was the worst. 2. A man who washed his hair only when he got a haircut. He came to me only 2 times a year. The smell of the oil was sickening and he had dandruff. Oh my, he had so much dandruff. 6 months worth. I was the only person in the shop who could stomach doing his hair. I washed it 6 times or more. I wish we wore masks then. 3. Men who fiddle under their cape. Please stop doing that. 4. Men who recorded us and took photos. My manager at the time went outside and looked through the window behind him to see what he was doing. He was asked to delete everything and to leave. His wife came in angry and yelled at us. One girl's husband called the guy and screamed at him. I don't know how he got his number. 5. I did a lady's hair for her husband's funeral. She sat quietly and wept the whole time. I had to hide my face because I kept crying with her. That was hard. 6. Shaved a woman's head who ultimately passed away from cancer. She didn't cry. I promised her I wouldn't cry. When she left, I cried in the back. That's all I can remember right now. I'm sure there's more. Story 27. I have 2 stories, both about other people though. First is one of my male teachers who had a pretty nice hairstyle. Short, as in not going past his neck, but pretty long and full. Then one day he comes in with basically a buzz cut. I'm thinking, huh? Okay, but don't say anything. Then class starts and I think one of the other students asks what happened, so he goes, I asked for 2 inches off the top. They said I said 2 inches on the top. Yeah, it took a few months to grow back to its original length. The other is about my nephew. My sister was cutting his dad's hair and put down the scissors by the sink while using the razor. My nephew somehow grabbed the scissors and cut into his own hair. He was fine, but a noticeable strand was missing, leaving a hole in his hair. So my sister had to give him a buzz cut to even it out. He loved it though because it felt prickly. He's never done it with normal scissors, but we think he might have thought since this was for hair cutting, he can cut his hair with it. I don't know, 3 years old, man. Story 28. I worked at a prestigious salon in an affluent neighborhood of Atlanta. While I was shampooing a client's hair, a roach fell from the open rafter ceiling right into the shampoo bowl. I had to finish washing her hair without freaking out so as to not cause a scene. I was not graceful about it by any means, but I managed to keep the client from finding out about it. When we were done, I tried to contain the demon roach by covering it with a towel and ran to the back to get the salon assistant and maintenance man to take care of the problem. Good times. Story 29. Okay, not a barber, but a story of my barbers. I have a bald spot on the left side of my head. This is the first time my dad took me there. So she starts cutting and snipping and she buzzes on the left side and notices it. So she calls my dad over and says, has this always been there or did I do this? So we look at each other and say, he's had this since he was 9 months old. We just laughed. We heard a sigh of relief from her. Story 30. Stylist here. After graduating, I did an advanced master's program, which was an additional year of training. On my last day, for my test out, we had 6 very specific requirements we needed. My 6th model shows up for a color service and she has several sores on her head. And I'm freaking out, look like scabies. I cannot perform a chemical service on her. I go to the instructor and he's like, well, I guess you are going to fail. I sent the client packing and run outside. It's a major downtown city and I start running up to people on the street asking if I can color their hair. I ended up paying a homeless woman $30 to let me color her hair. Mid-service, she goes to the bathroom and ends up coating with color in her hair. We have to call an ambulance to come get her. There's hair color and mess all over the bathroom that I have to clean up. The woman was okay. I saw her a week later in the same spot as before. After all that, I technically didn't have a model to submit, but thankfully still passed. Story 31. I've not worked as a hairdresser for a good few years now, but I still cut my husband's hair. Thankfully, this happened when I was cutting his hair. This happened in December of last year. So I've been meaning to cut his hair for a couple of weeks, but things just kept getting in the way. But one night, we were both sick of putting it off and got down to business. It was around 1 a.m. at this point. I was tired and wanted to go to bed, but there was no way we were putting it off any longer. Got the clippers and the guards out and laid them out on the bathroom counter, put the first guard on the clippers when my husband reminded me I probably should oil the blade. Okay, cool. Took the guard off, oiled those bad boys up, and off I go. Oh crap, I forgot to put the guard back on. So there it is, a big whopping bald patch in my husband's hair. Me hysterically laughing but also crying and profusely apologizing from guilt, and my husband completely unimpressed at the whole thing. I don't know whether to just give up and call it a night or attempt to salvage the absolute disaster that I'd created. Ended up trying to see what I could do with it, but it was just so short there was absolutely nothing that could be done unless we were to completely shave the whole lot off. Luckily, he works from home, so he could hide away until they got to a length where it could be blended. He was supposed to be going into work a couple days after that, but of course told them hell no and told all his coworkers about my enormous screw-up. I would say lesson learned, don't cut hair late at night when you're tired, but I've literally just finished up cutting his hair at midnight before I opened Reddit and saw this post. I always check, double check, and triple check now those before going in. Never again. Got a great picture and story to tell people now though, I guess. Story 32. Not a barber, but I was once in inpatient rehab for a few months, and they would take us to get haircuts at the local barber college every few weeks. My hair had been growing out from neglect, and I had a big beard. I decided to let them clean me up a bit. My first red flag should have been that all of the practice mannequins were black and had very outdated 80s looking black men's hairstyles. My hair was past shoulder length, think homeless rocker, and I am super white. The next red flag was my barber absolutely reeked of grass. Not cool when giving haircuts to a bunch of people in rehab. He started razoring my beard, and I was kind of excited because I'd never gotten a shave like that before. I should also mention that without my glasses, I'm near legally blind, so I actually had to ask him to stop so that I could check out the progress. He had managed to turn my glorious beard into a crappy, super thin chin strap, and my mustache was like pencil thin also, and it's usually very full. I looked like riffraff, and my rocker long hair. I guess this guy had only cut women's hair at that length because he somehow took it off my shoulders, but then it started curling out like Cat Williams. There was nothing I could do but endure the laughter in the buggy all the way back to the facility where I promptly shaved everything off, lol. Story 33. Well, I'm not the barber, but I was just chilling with my friends when my mom came in and said, I got someone to cut your hair. So I followed her, but we didn't get in the car. I then saw this one lady walking up to us saying she was a barber and my mom trusted her. So we went upstairs to a room under construction and she tells me to sit in this old dusty chair and then asks me how I want my hair done. I tell her I just want it short on the sides and a little trim on the top. So she starts to cut my hair and she cuts my top short and my sides short. My parents used to do this when I was little and I looked ugly as heck. So she is done cutting my hair and I look in the mirror, smile and say thanks. My head legit looked like a hairball a cat would cough up, LMAO. Story 34. I know the only people seeing this will be sorting by new, but I have my own screw-up story. I'm a woman and I had a mohawk for over a decade that I usually trimmed up myself. I worked in a hospital at the time, so I couldn't have the sides super short. Well, maybe I could, but the point is it looked very model-esque on me and that's how I could get away with having a mohawk at a hospital, but I had to keep it looking really femme. One day while trimming and polishing, I took the guard off the clippers to take care of the wispy bits at my nape, and when I went back to make sure the sides were even, I forgot to put the guard back on the clippers and mowed a good 2.5 to 4 inch section of my hair completely down. I freaked out and went to my aunt who had a brilliant solution. She covered up the newly bald spot with brown eyeshadow. It worked and I never got in trouble for my hair for the 2 months it took to grow back. Story 35. Not a barber, but I was cutting a friend's hair for the first time with help from a friend at university. Neither of us had cut someone's hair before, but he just wanted it too, all over, and it's basically just buzzing his hair with clippers until everything is neat. My friend did a lot of the sides, and we just needed to cut his fringe, so I did that and was past the clippers. I took off the guard. That's a screw-up. Clearly, I didn't take after family members who cut hair for a living because I almost instantly left a bald patch in his fringe. After we got ourselves under control from all the laughing, we had to fix it. So we had to shave him bald. I have no idea how he's still my good friend now. Story 36. Not a barber, but one time when I was a broke college student, I decided to cut my own hair. It was shortish and in layers. One of my dorm mates said to just section it off, put each section in a ponytail and trim the tips. Easy enough, right? Wrong. It was a big old mess. I wore a bandana for 3 weeks. My hair grows really fast, then went to a shop by my dorm. The girl who cut my hair, after messing with it for a few minutes, said to me, I don't want to offend you or anything, but whoever cut your hair last did not know what they were doing. I replied, yeah, I know. That's why I'll never let her cut my hair again. Story 37. My husband and I met on the job. When we started dating, we kept it very, very quiet. A few months into it, he asked me to cut his hair. Never did it before, but he says it's simple. Slaps a guard on the old pair of dog clippers his dad had used to cut him and his brother's hair when they were kids, and tells me just go around until everything is even. It goes well, really well actually. I get over his ears and have to take the guard off to get the little hairs. Oopsie. I cut a line from below his ear to just above it. Thank God he was and still is cool. He laughed. We worked at a casual place, so he kept a pen tucked behind his ear or a hat on for a little bit. It grew back pretty fast. I heard him telling one of our coworkers he'd gone to someone who was new on the job and they messed it up. I had to tuck my chin and face the computer to keep from laughing. We've been together almost 20 years. I still cut his hair. Haven't screwed up since. Story 38. I'm not a barber, but I do cut my own hair. I've given myself a few shoddy runs with the clippers. I like the top off a little longer than the sides, and it took time to figure things out. Worst moment was when I forgot to put the guard back on the clippers for some reason, did a buzz on the back of my head near my neck, and saw a lot more hair come down than usual. I instantly realized what I had done and let out an "oh no." Luckily, I was able to go down to a nearby hair salon and they made something decent out of it. Had some extra short hair for a little bit. My wife and I still laugh about it. She was in the other room when I said, "oh no." It's kind of our go-to phrase for a silly, unexpected mistake now. And if any of these stories got to you, gave you a good chuckle or two, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.